Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, May the 27th, 2024. Recently, I've been talking quite a lot about the fixed star Caput Algol, with particular reference to a conjunction between Mars and Uranus on July the 15th, which is going to be on this fixed star. And Caput Algol is the nastiest star in the book, and I thought I would look at it in more detail today, and I wanted to look at some examples of people and events who have Mars, not just Mars, any planet on Caput Algol. So I do want to look at this star, and very often in astrology, in fact you could say almost invariably, when we try to understand what something means, we often look at mythology. So the mythology regarding Caput Algol relates to Medusa. So Medusa was a gorgon, and she had her hair was covered in snakes. So the picture on the thumbnail is a picture by Caravaggio of Medusa, and she had the ability to turn people into stone. Though there are some variants of the legend, the original version of the legend was that she was born like that. But then Ovid, the Roman poet, came up with a different view, that originally she was a beautiful woman, and she was a priestess in the temple of Minerva. And of course, when you're in that kind of position, you're somewhat vulnerable. I think you've got oaths of chastity and all that, and of course if that oath gets broken, dreadful things happen, as with the Vestal Virgins. And according to Ovid's version, Medusa was raped by Neptune in the temple of Minerva, and Neptune was Minerva's husband. And so that's serious, as you can imagine, in Roman mythology. And as a result, Minerva got her revenge by transforming what used to be a beautiful woman into being a monster with hair as snakes. I mean, imagine that. Imagine your hair is just snakes. I mean, if you really think about it, that's really bad. And also had this ability to turn people into stone, anyone who looked at her. So whichever way you consider this legend, it's not good. And I do want to consider the meaning of Algol. And, a lot of people are terrified of Algol. I've come across people, first time, I went to an astrology class, I came across this woman who seemed to be really concerned about having something in her chart that was conjunct Algol. Really, really concerned. I could see it in her face. And so I thought I should look at Algol in this video. But before I do that, I want to look at what's going on today, which is Monday, May the 27th, 2024. So here is the position of the planets today. And you will see that the moon is in late Capricorn, on the verge of moving into Aquarius. Now, to be precise, the moon moves into Aquarius at 9:15 in the evening today. 10:15 this evening if you're in London. So that means that if you're in New York, it moves into Aquarius at 4:45 in the afternoon. If you're in Los Angeles, that's 1:45 in the afternoon. So if you are in Europe, then it's mainly a moon in Capricorn day, and the moon doesn't really go into Aquarius until very late. If you're in the Americas, then this afternoon there is a changeover, so you might experience a change as the moon moves from Capricorn to Aquarius. Now, if you are in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, then the moon is going to be in Capricorn all day, and you don't have to worry about moon in Aquarius until tomorrow. So the moon is certainly going to be in a Saturn-ruled sign all day long, regardless of where you are, because moon in Capricorn, Saturn rules Capricorn, moon in Aquarius, Saturn rules Aquarius. So we can say that there is something rather Saturnine about today, and we may be trying to, in some way, discipline and restrain ourselves. We're not really going to be into massive displays of emotion, though there is a difference between moon in Capricorn and moon in Aquarius. Moon in Capricorn tends to be more materialistic, more concerned about material details. After all, Capricorn is an earth sign, whereas moon in Aquarius being an air sign, it's more about variety, and it's more interested in things. Moon in Capricorn doesn't really want to be interested in things just for the sake of it. It wants to consider what is the purpose, whereas perhaps moon in Aquarius is a little more cautious. Now, as far as lunar aspects are concerned, the moon, as it moves through late Capricorn, it makes a sextile to Saturn. That's a very nice sextile. You should really be feeling that if you're in East Asia, Australia, New Zealand particularly. So moon sextile Saturn represents focus and discipline and being able to get things organized and sorted out, and getting a firm control of one's feelings, not making sure they don't get out of control. Then the moon makes a trine to Uranus, and I think all of us at some level will be feeling that trine to Uranus. It does create a certain sense of excitement, I suppose, though it is in earth signs. Moon in Capricorn trines Uranus in Taurus. So I suppose we might be thinking about the way things could be changed, the way arrangements could be changed. And we might want to do that at short notice. I should also make sure that you understand that there is a square between Moon and Mars. Now, that square between Moon and Mars, I think, is mainly going to be felt by those of you in Europe and Asia. I think if you're in the Americas, I don't think you're really going to get that Moon square Mars. But if you are in Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that Moon square Mars could present a little bit of aggravation. Moon square Mars is about someone thinking they're right, believing they're right, and maybe that person is you, and there could be a certain amount of anger flying around. So do be careful about that. Now, when the moon moves into Aquarius, it straight away makes a trine to Jupiter. Now, I think all of us, regardless of where we are going to feel this trine between the moon and Jupiter. Even if the moon is in Capricorn all day long, because the moon is still starting to make that 120-degree aspect to Jupiter. And so I think that as the day progresses, we're going to feel a growing sense of optimism. And I must emphasize that doesn't matter where you are. Even if you're in Australia or New Zealand, I think you will start to feel a growing sense of optimism, especially at the end of the day. And there will be a feeling that things can go right and that it is worth making the effort. Okay, we may not be quite ready to make the effort to really push things across the line, but it's happening. And so I think it is important to be optimistic and, to look beyond whatever is going on in our immediate environment, and to think that things are good, and if you don't seem good, then you've just got to see it through. Now, another aspect going on, which was exact over the weekend, is a semi-square between the Sun and Mars. So that Sun-Mars semi-square is somewhat problematic. Okay, it is fading in terms of its influence, but still, the Sun and Mars, both male planets, both very energetic planets, they want to express themselves, they want their way, and so we do have to be a bit careful with that Sun semi-square Mars. We might be too obsessed with getting our way, being right, and we might take things too far too fast, because Sun-Mars as a pair can be a little bit accident prone, and we have to be especially careful if we're playing around with, I don't know, fireworks, electricity, dangerous things. So be careful with that Sun-Mars square. Yes, its influence is fading, but I would have said that its influence is still very much there. And when we look at Sun-Mars today, we notice that both the Sun and Mars are aspecting the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. So, there's Saturn at 18 Pisces, there's Uranus at 23 Taurus, and so you can see that Mars is on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. And the Sun is semi-square the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. And so with the Saturn-Uranus midpoint being activated, I think that many of us are going to feel tense today. There's just going to be a tension, but we're feeling a bit trapped. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to express ourselves. And we just feel that something has to give. And if we don't feel tense, then it's quite likely that someone else is going to be feeling tense. So it's not a particularly easy day in that sense. And to be honest, I would have said that the most important astrological event today, Monday, is the Sun and Mars being on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. And I do think around the world, both in terms of the personal and collective, there is going to be a sense of tension. So we have to work out how to deal with this tension. And with Jupiter conjunct the Sun-Uranus midpoint, that may point to some kind of breakthrough. So this tension might be there, but perhaps Jupiter will allow us to take some kind of sudden action. It mustn't be too sudden. Remember what I said about sudden Sun semi-square Mars being a little bit dangerous. But there may be some initiative we can take that can actually break through that tension. So that is something we should be looking out for. Turning to the heliocentric picture, I just do think it's important to always consider the heliocentric view. We get too caught up in the geocentric view, putting the Sun in the middle of the solar system. I'm not saying that anything fantastic is going on, just to get the broad picture. You can see that the Earth is moving towards a square of Saturn. So we're going to get exactly the same picture from a geocentric perspective, because the Sun is now in Gemini, and it is slowly moving to the square of Saturn. Now, that square is not going to happen geocentrically until much later in the month. But from a heliocentric point of view, that Earth square Saturn is starting to form, and in less than a week, the Earth will be making that exact square Saturn, and so that exact square to Saturn. And I think we might be starting to feel its build-up, maybe feeling that something is being held up, and in the world in general, there may be a little bit of negativity creeping in as the Earth makes that square to Saturn. though we shouldn't get too excited about it, because Earth square Saturn or Sun square Saturn is not an unusual event. It will happen twice a year, and that's, I think, the main thing going on from a heliocentric perspective. So just with a quick look at the heliocentric solar system, I'm not convinced there's much to get excited about right now. Which brings me on to the 12 signs. So maybe I'm not going to say as much as usual about the 12 signs, because there's not a great deal happening, not so many aspects. So we'll have to see what happens. I never know for sure how long I'm going to go on for, but I'm going to try, if possible, to keep it brief. And so let's go back to the geocentric view. Okay, so these are my forecasts for 12 signs for today, which is Monday, May the 27th, 2024. Aries, you're feeling tense. Maybe very tense. You just feel that something is holding you back. And there's something you want to do, and you want to do it right now, but you're not able to do it. It just feels that your progress is being blocked. And you might then be wondering what you should do about it. I mean, all this is because Mars, which is your ruler, is conjunct the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. Now, Mars is in a very strong position. You are in a position to make things happen. You really can create waves. But at the moment, you feel you can't. I think you should regard this as a short-term situation. You can't be doing stuff all the time. Maybe if you're in the Americas, it's Memorial Day, isn't it? So Memorial Day, people don't do so much. Is that right? I'm not very familiar with American holidays and what people do and don't do on these days, but it is Memorial Day, so maybe that means there'll be fewer opportunities than usual. But you do have a strength to make things happen, I suppose, if you really want them to happen. But the question is, what is the cost? If you were to bulldoze your ideas through, how much damage are you going to cause? I suppose you do have to think about the social environment and what impact you're going to have. And there is a question of how you deal with your tension. And I suppose you have to try to be constructive and find something useful to throw your energies into. I mean, I suppose I could say, meditation, prayer, whatever, but I don't think that's really going to cut much ice. I think that perhaps you have to ask yourself, what is holding you back? What do you think it is? Who are the people that are annoying you? And what would be an appropriate way of making things happen? So that is a thought for you. And I think that if you can some way find a way to be, to relax, or to find some way of just getting your energies out constructively. And I just don't think that you can really rely on other people today. I think that you may find that just some people are not going to be their usual selves. They're not going to be in the mood for doing anything. And I don't think you can count on their promises. And even if they are able to do something, it may not happen as quickly as you want. So at the very least, you need to expect some kind of delay. Though I don't think everyone can be written off. I mean, if you're in the Americas, be patient. I think that when the moon moves out of Capricorn into Aquarius, which takes place this afternoon, if you're in the Americas, and I'm really addressing this point to those in the Americas, that when the moon moves into from Capricorn into Aquarius, there may be a certain sense that things are starting to move again, because the moon is, when it moves into Aquarius, is making that trine to Jupiter, and perhaps there'll be a certain sense of flow, and you might find that other people are more cooperative, but still, you should not really hope for much to happen. And then, indeed, if you have zero hopes, then I think you can be pleasantly surprised. I'm really sorry, Aries. I try to be positive, particularly for Aries, but I think that Sun semi-square Mars on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint is kind of quite overwhelming, and I just think it's very important that you don't force things, because if you try to force things, at the very least you could cause upset. You might cause accidents and other kinds of trouble. So just take it easy, Aries, and don't panic. Things are going to change. Taurus, you seem to be holding back. Maybe you're still getting used to Jupiter leaving your sign, which of course happened over the weekend, but there is a sense in which you are holding back and you are putting things on ice. And in terms of who you are and what you want, no one knows, I think, because you're not revealing it. And perhaps you think there's no point today. And that could be quite irritating for other people. So if you have made promises, for example, then make sure you honour your promises. Of course, that depends on what the promises are. Sometimes you make an unreasonable promise, and of course you don't want to honour an unreasonable promise. But as a Taurus, you're supposed to be reliable, and maybe today you're not going to be quite as reliable as you usually are. So do consider that, and also do consider how your actions or lack of action might impact other people. Because if you just do things your way or don't do things your way, there is a real possibility that you could make people somewhat angry and annoyed. So it just is really important to consider that. Now, as the day progresses, there is some change of focus. And I think that change of focus is going to especially be the case if you're in the Americas, because with the moon moving into Aquarius, I think things will improve. And the moon moves into Aquarius in the Americas this afternoon. And so this afternoon, if you're an American Taurus, you might start to get your focus back. And it might occur to you what needs to be done. And I think that if you sort of focus on material stuff and your ambitions, particularly your ambitions are important, and I think maybe your material ambitions, then late in the day you can really start to make progress. You're going to start to get a clear idea about what you want and how you want it to happen, and there may be insights about money. After all, the moon, as soon as the moon moves into Aquarius, it makes a trine to Jupiter, and so that moon trine Jupiter for American Taurans, I think could be very useful. Now, if you are not in America and you're in Australia, or particularly in Australia or New Zealand, Asia, then I'm talking about something that's going to happen tomorrow. So don't feel you're missing out. And if you're in Europe, maybe late this evening, you might have a change of heart, change of mind, and suddenly, just as you're maybe about to go to sleep, you'll realize that something needs to be done, and you might have a new sense of urgency. So do make the most of that. Well, I hope, Gemini, that you're enjoying or appreciating Jupiter moving through your sign. It is a big change. It's the beginning of a week, and so hopefully you're just seeing new opportunities to express yourself that just weren't there not so long ago. And so I think, Gemini, it's a time to think about what is available and to start to have another look at the landscape. The landscape now may be very different from what it was last week, because really things have changed. Now, that does not mean to say that it's going to be a completely easy day. I think it's possibly going to be a day when it could be quite difficult to get things done. Not necessarily because of you, but because of other people. Just other people are not fully going to be in the mood, at least in the first instance. Though, don't underestimate your persuasive powers. I think Geminis today are pretty persuasive, and Geminis can make things happen. And the reason they can make things happen is, firstly, because they have a fundamental optimism to them, especially now that you've got Sun, Venus, Jupiter in your star sign. You can see things and see possibilities that just didn't exist not so long ago. But also, I think, Gemini, you can be gently manipulative, and you know what buttons to press and what levers to pull. And I think with a bit of effort, you can bring people round to your way of thinking. Though some Geminis may feel that they're sort of emerging from a shell, and maybe this is still the fact that Jupiter's only just changed sign. You are emerging from a shell, and it may take a little bit of time before you're fully able to come out of this shell. And I think that if you're in Australia and New Zealand, Asia, you're going to be a little bit more shell-bound than, say, if you're in the Americas. I think in the Americas you're going to be quicker to move out of your shell and to engage with everything that's around, everything that's available. So do take your time. But when the time is right, you must be ready. Because things are changing, and the moon is moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. I think the moon's movement from Capricorn to Aquarius is something fortunate. If you're in the Americas, you benefit from the moon moving into Aquarius today, from this afternoon. If you're in other parts of the world, then that's going to be more about what's going on tomorrow. But you can still start to prepare for it. And I think wherever you are, you're going to have a feeling that certain things which used to be complicated are starting to simplify. And you may even wonder, why did you get so worked up about something so recently? When you look at it again now, you're realizing it's just not a big deal. And that should give you a great sense of relief that as complications start to resolve, that gives you more opportunities for taking constructive action. Cancer. The problem about today, from a perspective of me trying to tell you what's going to happen today or trying to forecast for today, is the fact that I'm very focused on the moon. The moon is very important when making forecasts, and today the moon is somewhat split. It's moving from Capricorn to Aquarius. And so we can say, looking at it from a Cancerian perspective, that there is going to be a change. You move, when the moon is in Capricorn, all things being equal, we say that you're in a situation where you've got to pay a certain amount of attention to other people, and you've got to consider their influence on you. When the moon moves into Aquarius, I think you can be more independent-minded and you can start thinking for yourself. And I don't think that you have to worry so much about what other people are doing. So there is this change, but when this change happens, so depends on your time zone. If you are an American Cancerian, then first part of the day until the afternoon, the moon is in Capricorn, and like everyone else, you have to deal with the moon being in Capricorn. And so that means having to consider the impact of external events on you, for better or for worse. And there may be times when you have to take into account sudden events, people suddenly deciding something, suddenly wanting something, and that's something you have to deal with. Then, again, if you're an American Cancerian, moon suddenly goes into Aquarius, and things change. You start to become, I think, a little bit less emotional than usual, and you become more independent-minded, and at the same time, you can look at the things going on around you with a certain sense of detachment. And that's very important for a Cancerian, to have detachment. And you're not going to be so emotionally involved with it all, and you are, as I said, going to be very aware of your independence. And this may allow you to get to grips with really rather complicated subjects. And at the same time, the moon, when it moves into Aquarius, does make a trine to Jupiter. And that trine to Jupiter is very fortunate. And that good fortune is not going to come from without, it's going to come from within. It's about yourself and your perceptions and what's going on in your little world. And in that little world, things are happening which really can work in your favor. You dig deep down and you find something, and you can really take advantage of it. Now, if you're not in the Americas, what I have just been talking about is more about tomorrow. If you're not in the Americas, it's really a moon in Capricorn day. Okay, if you're in London, moon does go into Aquarius at 9:45 in the evening, but the day is all pretty much gone by then. And so with the moon moving through late Capricorn, then there are still people to deal with. And even if you're not dealing with them directly, you're very much aware of other people's influence on you. It could be quite dramatic, and you may have to take into account other people's changes of plan, and they might do something you weren't expecting. Now, it needn't be bad. It might actually be something quite interesting, but you have to be there and you have to take into account of it. So it is a somewhat complicated day, but I'm not saying it's an especially dramatic day. I think it's just it's a day wherever you are. It's a day of flux. It's a day of change, but don't get too excited by it. Don't over-respond to what's going on today, because I just don't think in the end it's going to be worth it. Leo. I suppose the most important aspect today, Leo, is the Sun and Mars hitting the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. Mars is conjunct the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, and the Sun is semi-square the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. And of course, the Sun is your ruler. So if the Sun is on your Saturn-Uranus midpoint, then I think that you're going to be picking up a lot of quite tense vibrations from the outer world. You're realizing that the world is tense and people are just waiting for something to happen, but they don't know what to do. And that could be somewhat disconcerting. And this is especially going to be the case if you're with other people. I mean, I don't know what your plans are today. I know that in America it's Memorial Day. I don't know what people do on Memorial Day, but whatever your plans are today, these plans may not entirely work out. After all, the Sun and Mars are on, the Sun and Mars are hitting the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. People are on edge. And I know that on a Memorial Day, people are supposed to be able to relax. Well, I suppose they're also supposed to remember fallen soldiers, but I think very often a day like this, people just regard it as a holiday. But people are not going to be able to relax, I don't think. So what was the point? What is the point on having a holiday if you're in the Americas? Maybe people don't have a holiday anyway. A lot of people in America have two or three or four jobs, and they certainly haven't got time for to be relaxing, maybe. But it's going to be difficult to relax. So perhaps we shouldn't try to relax, and perhaps Leos shouldn't try too hard to relax, because, in fact, if you are still in just one place, supposedly enjoying the sunshine, even if there is sunshine, which there probably isn't. Look here, I'm looking out of a window here in Washington State. I'm looking just at clouds. I think it's raining, actually. So relaxation could be something that people try very hard to achieve, but they're not going to achieve. And I don't think that you as a Leo are going to achieve a state of relaxation. And maybe that's a good thing. There are things to do. If you are tense, that means that you are motivated. Just make sure that you don't scatter your energy in useless ways. Try to have, if you possibly can, some kind of focus. And maybe if you're socializing, as I said, a lot of people, I suppose, like to socialize. If you're in America and it's Memorial Day, if you are socializing, try to have some kind of purpose for it. Try to think, what are you trying to achieve? Just don't try to live for the moment. I know everyone is supposed to live for the moment. That's what the Buddhists tell us, that we should treat each breath as our last. But it can be exhausting trying to live for the moment. I know one is supposed to live for the moment, but yeah, it can be tough. And I think that, Leo, you're going to be either living in the past or the future. And I think that perhaps you'll be thinking very hard about the future. And perhaps some of your frustration might be that you're not able to get to the future fast enough, that things are holding you back. And that is a good reason just to accept the situation and make an effort to do something, though be careful how you go, because the Sun is semi-square Mars. Both Sun and Mars are on a Saturn-Uranus midpoint. Sun is your ruler. Mars can be about aggravation, can be potentially about accidents. So, Leo, you may be a little more accident-prone than usual, so it's just important that you are careful and that you don't do anything dangerous, and everything needs to be safe. Finally, I suppose I need to say that if you are in the Americas, or perhaps in Europe very late in the evening, then you may benefit from the moon's movement into Aquarius, because when the moon moves into Aquarius, it makes a trine to Jupiter. And I think that trine to Jupiter is going to an extent, act as some kind of relief on that tension. And it may be that you can engage with one other person in a new way. And you might see at the last moment a new and very constructive side to someone's personality, which actually gives you considerable cause for hope. And so by interacting with the right person, you can start to see the day and the immediate future in a very different and very positive light. Now, don't feel left out if you're in Asia Australia, New Zealand, because I'm just talking about something that's going to happen tomorrow. It's just delayed. It's not that you're missing it. Virgo, you are quite ambitious, I think. I think I mentioned it when I was talking about the weekend a couple of videos ago. There are things that you do want to happen, and it's all because Jupiter has moved into Gemini, and that is an important movement, because from a Virgo view, Gemini is a high-profile sign, and now that Jupiter's in Gemini, you're very much aware of the things that you want and the things that you want to achieve. And I think you're going to be asking yourself now whether your existing situation is giving you everything you want. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of work, but it may not be just about work. It's about what you want from the outside world, what you expect from the outside world. And if you are not getting it, you may actually be contemplating a change. And I'm not talking really about anything immediate happening today. I'm talking about a more longer term trend. Remember, Jupiter remains in Gemini for a year. I think it leaves Gemini and goes into Cancer beginning of June 2025. So that's something you do have to consider. And I think the reason you might be considering it now is because it's Monday, it's the beginning of a week. Even if it is Memorial Day, it's the beginning of a week. Things need to be done. And changes perhaps should be contemplated. And Jupiter is actually moving towards a trine of Pluto. It's not actually there yet, but I think you're starting to feel it. And the Jupiter-Pluto trine is all about self-improvement. And so I think that is slowly what you are really starting to consider. And you just kind of feel just the current state just isn't good enough. And I think that's going to be what's happening today as well. I think that maybe, Virgo, you were engaged with something that seems to be working fine, but you've reached a point where you have to make a decision. If you want to go further with something, you're going to have to put in a lot of work. And do you want to put in that work? It probably is the right thing to do. If you're not prepared to put in the work, then something you've been putting a lot of effort into is just not going to succeed, I don't think. And so that is a decision you have to make. Are you going to continue your investment of time into something, or are you going to take the view that really, realistically, it is too much effort and that you should be focusing on something else? So that really is something you need to think about. Now, in terms of your relationship with other people, I think that today you are actually quite charismatic, and if there's something you want, you're going to know how to get it. And you will get it through a certain amount of subtlety. You don't have to be upfront about it, make direct demands. It's about understanding the situation, thinking and feeling, and being quietly manipulative. And I know the word manipulative, I use this word, I suppose, quite a lot when I do my forecast, but the word manipulative shouldn't be seen in a negative way. It's just understanding what you need to do to bring someone round to your way of thinking. And that, I think, you can do, but in a way that just is not intrusive. It's just very natural. You don't have to force things. So if there's something you want and you think that other people can provide it, I think there's a very good chance that you will just know what to do and what arguments to put forward and how best to behave. Libra, you aren't quite feeling yourself at the moment, I don't think. I think, Libra, you may not be sure what you're supposed to be doing. You're almost a feeling of limbo. I mean, you know that something has to be done in the future, but you still feel that the past is strong, and you don't feel ready to make commitments. And if you have made promises in the past, then I don't know, you might be tempted not to honour those promises. Now, if you're in a position where you don't want to honour a promise, then you have to work out how you're going to do it. Sometimes we make promises and those promises are unrealistic when we actually look at the reality of the situation. So you don't want to be tied by your promises, but you can't just break them in some arbitrary way. You actually have to confront the people involved. You have to kind of tell them to their face, you're not going to do it. In most cases, yeah, it is going to be tough, and you as a social animal are not going to be happy about it. But it is the right way to go about things, and it is the appropriate way to do it. And sometimes there are ways of breaking a promise which can be sort of reassuring, or can at least sort of make things not quite so bad. For example, you may take the view that you're not quite able to make a commitment today. And rather than say, oh, you can't do something, you can say, well, I can't do something today and I can't do something tomorrow. Because I think at the moment, Libra, there is a great sense in which you feel that you want to delay. You're not ready to move from one state to another state. You want to just spend a little bit more time where you are. And it's not really a question of whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing to do. It's about you and what you're able to do. Yeah, sure, it would be great if you were dynamic and you could quickly make up your mind and you could quickly move from point A to point B, but we just have to be realistic. Things just are a little bit slower than usual, and you need to accept that. Now, there is a certain time zone element to this question, and I think that if you are in the Americas, you are going to find it easier to be decisive from the afternoon onwards, and that's because this afternoon in the Americas, the moon changes sign from Capricorn to Aquarius, and so when the moon changes sign from Capricorn into Aquarius, it will make a trine to Jupiter, and that will make you, I think, more dynamic, and it will give a boost to your social skills. So if you want to tell someone something, it's going to be relatively easy. And even if you are going to be breaking a promise, you're going to be able to sugarcoat the message. Now, if you're not in the Americas, then I think you are a little more stuck. And in fact, if you are in Australia, New Zealand, maybe the Philippines, you're going to start to really feel an aspect between Moon square Mars. Well, not just Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines. I'm just saying East Asia, Singapore, for example. Moon square Mars, you're going to feel that aspect between Moon square Mars. And that Moon square Mars may actually be about an argument. So if you break a promise, for example, that might get a negative response. So you're perhaps going to have to be a lot more careful if you're in Australia, New Zealand, or East Asia. If you're in Europe and the Americas, I don't think that moon square Mars is going to be such a big deal. So yes, there is a time zone element to it. Though I should point out that, because I want to end on a positive note, that Venus is currently making a conjunction to the Sun and a conjunction to Jupiter. And I want to just look at that conjunction with Venus on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint in the most positive way. Firstly, I know I've been quite negative about Libra. Venus is your ruler. Venus is in mutual reception to Mercury. Your ability to communicate, if you make the effort, is really good. So if you want to give someone bad news, tell someone you don't want to honour a promise, that is the right way to say it. That Venus-Mercury mutual reception, Venus in Mercury's sign, Mercury in Venus's sign, does allow you to get that message across in a way that minimises offence. And also with Venus on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint, try to be positive. You don't have to be positive about actually what is happening today, but you can be positive about your broad direction. And regardless of today's inaction and inertia and concerns, the broad direction is in place. And you're really starting to feel Jupiter moving into Gemini now. And from a Libran perspective, that Jupiter in Gemini is about giving you new ideas, new horizons, something to really concentrate on. So try to focus on the negative and don't get totally obsessed about what's going on today. Think about next week, next month, and all the things that you can be doing in the near future. Scorpio. Mars is conjunct the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. And Mars is, of course, your ruler. So with Mars conjunct the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, I think that many Scorpios might feel that they are under a little bit of pressure. And you might pass that on. So if you're under pressure, you might want to put other people under pressure. I mean, I think that's something you can certainly do. After all, Mars is in Aries. Mars is strongly placed in Aries. Aries is the sign ruled by Mars. And it's like, when you're feeling tense, other people feel tense. And you're not going to let other people relax. At least that is a possibility there. So in that sense, Scorpio, you could be very good at imposing your feelings onto other people. And, you think about, we think about boundaries being weak. When we hear about boundaries being weak, we often think about all that garbage from outside coming inside and us being overwhelmed by other people and their feelings. But weak boundaries can work the other way. It's like our feelings and our tension being pushed outwards and going through our boundaries and being imposed upon everyone around us. And is that what you want to do? Do you want to have everyone on edge? I'm not sure if that's such a good idea. I mean, maybe you feel it's necessary. You may feel that you're in a situation that needs to be taken seriously, and you may actually resent it if other people are too relaxed. Maybe they're just acting as if nothing is happening, watching the clouds go by, when all the while everything is collapsing and you just feel that is not right. And so in that sense, maybe people do need to be aware. But if you're going to make people tense and pass on your tension to other people, to others, you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to achieve? I mean, don't just do it for the sake of it. Do it because you're trying to be a motivating force. And I think today you really can be a motivating force. You know, you feel that something has to give and you want to make it happen. And I'm actually very confident that you can make things happen today. You can change everything. But again, you do have to consider what is the impact. Yes, you can get your way today, but I think there could be a price. And this Mars on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint is made even stronger by the fact that we have got the Sun semi-square Mars, and the Sun is also semi-square. It's semi-square the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, so that adds to the tension, and it makes you powerful, yes, but it also could make you hasty, and it could make you accident prone. I mean, accidents, it could be physical accidents, it could be explosions, maybe people getting really angry. Maybe that's what you want it to be. So that is distinctly possible. And I think that things could be made even worse by the fact that you may find certain people in your life really rather irritating. You know, you want them to do something. You perhaps assume that they're going to do something. You expect it, and they just don't go and do it. And people have got lots of excuses today, and there's a strong sense of delay. The delay is not coming from you. The delay is, I think, coming from certain people in your life. They are holding back. They're dragging their heels, and that could make you annoyed. If you do find that people are delaying and are not making commitments, and you know, for a lot of the signs I've been talking about today, I've been talking about broken promises, people breaking their promises, being affected by people breaking their promises. You know, as a Scorpio, you assume when people say something, they're going to follow it through. And today it might occur to you that people are not following through on their promises. I think it's just important you don't get too annoyed, that you take the view instead that this is perhaps a temporary situation, and perhaps you should wait for the situation to resolve and for people to become more decisive. Sagittarius, you are in quite an action-orientated state of mind. I think that you do want things to happen, and you know, in many ways, what's happening today is there are people who want things to happen, and there are people who don't want things to happen. So you can perhaps almost divide people up like that. And I'm not just talking about Sagittarians, I'm just talking about everyone. And I think that you are one of the people who do want action. And there could be a certain sense of impatience, but I don't think you're going to have the kind of impatience that I was talking about, you know, just now when I was talking to Scorpio. I think that Scorpios could be quite tense and impatient, but not Sagittarians. I think that you have a certain sense of an understanding of what's holding people back, and at the same time you probably are confident that if you keep pushing the same message, you can actually get results. And I suppose that's kind of what's going on. You know, the moon is in late Capricorn, but it is moving into Aquarius. And if you're an American Sagittarius, I think you very much pick up on that movement into Aquarius. So if you're in the Americas, then this afternoon, moon moves into Aquarius, and straight away the moon makes a trine to Jupiter, and of course Jupiter is your ruler. So with that moon trine Jupiter, you're really going to find it really easy to explain yourself. And even if other people are dragging their feet and are just not being cooperative, your explanations will make sense. And I think that you can give people a vision which is actually quite exciting. And so with the right words, you can persuade people to come round to your way of thinking. But it could take time. And if you're not in the Americas, there may be a period where you feel you're just getting nowhere, but people aren't listening. So that's possible. And, there may be sort of anger and frustration. But keep going and you will start getting progress. I think that if you're in Europe and you're up late tonight, then maybe by late this evening, as you move towards midnight, there'll be progress. So if you're having late night conversations and phone calls in Europe, then I think that in the end you will hit the mark, and you'll find other people finally understand what you're talking about. And if you're in Asia or Australia or New Zealand, maybe your efforts have to continue overnight. Okay, I'm not saying you have to stay up overnight, but keep going, and in the end you will get your point across. People will understand it, and then you'll be able to make good progress. Capricorn, you are feeling a little bit confused. You have been feeling confused on and off. And I think part of the problem is, Capricorn, that you're not entirely sure what you want. And because you're not exactly sure what you want, it's really quite difficult to do anything or even say anything. I mean, maybe it's just a question of you still having to make up your mind. Alternatively, there may be a sense in which you're processing information. There is a lot of information coming in, and not all of it is good information, but you're just trying to work it out. And it just may be that there has been a change recently. We've had Jupiter moving from Taurus into Gemini, and perhaps you're still trying to work out its implications and what it means for you. And so you just mustn't feel too hurried. If you don't understand the way things are, and if nothing makes sense, then there's absolutely no need to make any decisions or to do anything. And I do know, or at least I do understand, that the moon is moving towards the end of Capricorn. Wherever you are, whatever your time zone, at some stage today, the moon will be in late Capricorn. And I suppose with moon in late Capricorn, you're trying to work things out, you're trying to work things through, but it's like just as you think you've sorted it out, then you realize something else. And that may be to do with the fact that the moon is making a trine to Uranus. And so you suddenly there's new information to deal with, and you're not ready yet to really commit yourself. I mean, you felt you were. It just felt you were ready. You did feel you were ready, but now things have become complicated all over again. But don't worry about it. There'll be perhaps other opportunities later in the week to be able to get a clearer sense of what is going on. And I think short term, what's necessary is that you understand certain basic material details which perhaps in the past you hadn't really taken into consideration. Now you think, oh, you're a Capricorn. Capricorns are always on top of things when it comes to material details, but maybe not this time. So there is still some thinking and contemplating to do, and so just don't feel pressured. I'm sorry to be so downbeat, but I mean, there's no point in just trying to be positive for the sake of it. I'm not being negative, by the way. I'm just suggesting that today a lot of things are up in the air, and I think that you just need to accept that. Aquarius. The moon is moving into Aquarius, though when the moon moves into Aquarius kind of depends. If you're in the Americas, then this afternoon the moon moves into Aquarius. If you're in Europe, then late this evening the moon moves into Aquarius. If you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, then the moon doesn't move into Aquarius until tomorrow. So it does kind of depend, but you still feel that there is a sense in which things are changing and that things are starting to move your way, at least in terms of comprehension, in terms of really understanding things. And perhaps the most important aspect that is starting to form is a trine between the moon and Jupiter. So basically, the moon moves into Aquarius, it makes a trine to Jupiter. And Jupiter is, of course, a fortunate planet, and the moon and Aquarius is your sign. Now, even if you are in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and this trine between moon and Jupiter is not exact until tomorrow, I still think that you're going to be feeling this trine between moon and Jupiter. It just won't be so immediate as if you're in the Americas. It might be a little more vague, and you may have to work a little bit harder to try to envision what this moon-Jupiter trine is all about. Although tomorrow, Tuesday, that trine does become exact for you. So tomorrow morning you can hit the ground running, but we're talking about Monday, we're not talking about Tuesday. And with this moon trine Jupiter, I think that you're starting to get a sense of what you can do. I think quite recently you weren't entirely sure what you could do. You knew you could do something, but you couldn't entirely put your finger on it. I mean, I think that you've had Pluto moving into Aquarius, and that Pluto moving into Aquarius did give you a real boost. It might have been a bit challenging having Pluto in Aquarius, but it did give you a sense of your own power. But the question is, where are you going to use that power? Where are you going to apply it? And Jupiter is now making a trine to Pluto. It's not exact yet, but again, you're starting to feel that Jupiter trine Pluto. Jupiter trine Pluto is about self-improvement, and that's something you need to be thinking about, Aquarius. However good things are, they could be better. And I think you know it. And it's the kind of self-improvement that isn't too difficult. It's a trine between Jupiter and Pluto. It's not an opposition. And so with relative ease, you can improve yourself. And with the moon moving towards this trine of Jupiter and about to move into Aquarius, the question of self-improvement may actually be very important, and I think you can really start to concentrate on what you can do, because now it's starting to become clear, or at least it should be becoming clear. Now, one thing today is you perhaps want to avoid is complications. We always want to avoid complications, and you have to ask, where could those complications come from? Well, I think some of those complications could come from some other people. Some other people are not relaxed. A lot of people today are not relaxed, but they are not relaxed. They are somewhat hasty, and they could be just doing stuff without giving any warning. And it may not be easy to predict their next move, and it may not be easy to predict how they're feeling inside. Okay, people can feel inside, but some people like to impose their feelings, and they like to get angry. And by getting angry, they can claim the moral high ground. So you need to watch out for that. And so one-to-one relations today, I do think, need to be treated with a certain amount of caution. The sun is ruler of Leo, which is your opposite sign. The sun is making a semi-square to Mars. Sun and Mars are both on aspecting the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. So that represents certain people making your life difficult, maybe by imposing their inner tension onto you. And that's not something you want. So maybe you should just be a typical Aquarian and value your independence. Pisces, you continue to have a clear sense of who you are and what you want. And I think over the last few days, you have had the capacity to really impose your will on your environment. Hopefully you took that opportunity. Though I think today you probably want to slow down. I think for the moment you've done what you can, and people know where you stand. And if you try to pursue the matter, then your marginal utility is going to start decreasing. You're going to get less and less, you put more and more energy in, you get less and less out. And so you perhaps hit a point where you maybe should be considering holding back. And, the moon is now late in Capricorn. The moon has pretty much done its work in Capricorn, and it's moving into Aquarius. Okay, it might move into Aquarius tomorrow, it might move into Aquarius this afternoon, okay, if you're in the Americas. But the moon is essentially done with Capricorn. And, Aquarius from a Piscean view is quite a low-profile sign. And as the moon moves into Aquarius, you may just want to do your own thing and not feel you have to worry too much about other people. But I'm not saying you're going to be wasting your time, because the moon is actually applying to a trine of Jupiter. And Jupiter is your ruler. And I think that with the moon applying to a trine of Jupiter, you're going to start to get a clear sense of what makes you comfortable. Comfort is important. Comfort arguably is the beginning of everything, because if you're not comfortable, then really you're not going to be happy, and comfort is going to be particularly important right now. So Pisces, you have to consider what makes you comfortable, what makes you uncomfortable, and perhaps that might be a test for today. So maybe today, as different things happen, you can start to monitor your comfort levels. When you talk to one person, do you feel comfortable? Talk to another person, do you feel comfortable? When you go somewhere, if you are going somewhere, maybe you don't want to go anywhere. In fact, it's very likely you're not going to want to go anywhere. But whatever you're doing, ask yourself how comfortable you feel. And that feeling of comfort is going to give you perhaps an important pointer to the future, because I think over the next year, that's what it's all about. With Jupiter being in Gemini, it's where feeling safe, comfortable, and secure. And those are your priorities for the next year, until June of 2025, when Jupiter moves out of Gemini into Cancer. So I think events today and tomorrow, with the moon making that trine to Jupiter, are going to give you real pointers to the future in terms of how to make yourself comfortable, and also how to avoid people and situations that make you feel nervous and uncomfortable. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. I think I've managed to be briefer than usual, but there wasn't a lot going on today. Not really. And also, I suppose in America it's Memorial Day, so perhaps people are doing less stuff than usual. But as I said, I don't really understand how American holidays work. But I now want to consider today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 64, which is before completion. So hexagram 64 is the final hexagram in the I Ching, because there are 64 hexagrams, and this is the 64th. And this gives us the idea that we are in the process of crossing a river, but we haven't reached the far bank. And things can still go wrong. The image that I Ching likes to give is of a fox trying to cross a river, or perhaps trying to cross some ice. And the fox has to be very careful. And in particular, the fox mustn't get its tail wet, because if it gets its tail wet, it will be get dragged under the water and could drown. So we do have to be extra careful as we try to cross the river. We mustn't think we've finished. We're not there yet. And we have one moving line. We have the second line from the bottom moves. And this second line can be interpreted in different ways. One view is to say, well, we're not strong enough to continue for the moment. It's not a disaster. We're not out of our depth or anything. We can still touch the bottom, but we're getting bogged down, and we should therefore consider pulling back for the moment, because we just haven't got the strength. But another view is that it's like we're stuck in mud, but where we are with these horses, we're like, perhaps we're in a carriage being pulled by horses across a river, which means it can't be a very deep river, I suppose, and carriage is stuck, and we're not able to get to the other side. But if we are patient, those horses, those poor horses, they are really pulling, and they can actually get us out of the mud and can, in the end, get us across the river. Still, I think patience is required. It's not so much that we necessarily have to retreat and go back to where we came from, but we certainly need to pause and put in the work in terms of where we are right now, because things are not moving, or they don't seem to be moving. And I do think this actually reflects a lot of what I was saying with my forecasts of the 12 signs. I don't think astrologically today was particularly satisfactory for most of the 12 signs. There was a sense that we're in limbo, but we were stuck, and certainly not a day for completing anything. But we need to keep moving. We need to allow those horses to do their work if they can. And in the end, if we're patient, we get the movement and we are able to cross to the other side. But we have to be careful about it, and we have to be decisive, and we have to also be realistic. And this hexagram 64, it does move to the other side. And it moves to hexagram 35, which is progress. And I think that progress really speaks for itself. And the I Ching, I think it talks about getting audiences 3 times. So it's like the powers that be start to recognize us. We actually are starting to get traction. And so do not despair. Things are happening. And it is tough, but once we put in the work, put in the effort, and perhaps allow something else to help us, that may be the image of the horses trying to get us out of the mud, then soon enough we are able to make progress. And that's it for the I Ching. And now I want to talk about the star Caput Algol. And so I have been talking quite a lot about Caput Algol recently, with particular reference to this Mars conjunct Uranus on Algol on July the 15th, which I think is quite a dramatic aspect, which I think could be extremely dangerous. So this star is seen as being really negative. Caput Algol is Latin for head of the demon, or caput, Latin is head. In Arabic, it's Ras Algol. I think that the Latin Algol, Caput Algol, comes from the Arabic, so it's not a sort of Roman Latin. I think someone came up with that later. So Ras Algol in Arabic means head of the demon. Al-Ghul, the English word ghoul, as in ghosts and ghouls. What's that Cornish poem? Ghostism, ghoulism, long-leggedy beasties, and all that stuff. Or the Cornish prayer. Dear Lord, deliver us from ghostism, ghoulism, long-leggedy beasties. Isn't that right? Something like that. So the word ghoul, I believe, has an Arabic origin. And so we get that image of something really rather bad. And apparently, according to Robson, the Chinese called this star Xian She, if I've got that right. And apparently that means piled up corpses. So it's not just in sort of Western Arab culture that Algol has these negative connotations. And William Lilly, in his Christian Astrology, he has this table to help you evaluate the planets in a horoscope. And he says that if you have a planet on Caput Algol, I think it loses 5 points. I think that's right, 5 points. And indeed, I think he has an orb of about 5 degrees. It doesn't have to be exactly conjunct Algol to lose those 5 points. By the same token, he says if you've got a planet conjunct Regulus, it gains 5 points. So there is a long tradition of Algol being a difficult influence. And so we have to ask, what is that about? Now, it could be just about misfortune, just general misfortune and disaster. There may be particular parts of the body one sort of thinks about, maybe, because Algol is late Taurus. One might think about the throat, decapitation. After all, the Medusa was decapitated by Perseus. Remember, I think that Algol is the second brightest star in the constellation of Perseus. So that's it in a general sense. I do think also, when we're considering Algol, we need to consider jealousy and vanity. I think jealousy in particular that I do associate with Algol, that someone who's got a planet on Algol can be the victim of jealousy. And one might get the image of a beautiful woman who has something on Algol and people are jealous of her because of her beauty. That's one way of looking at it. So that's perhaps how the negativity works. And I mean, it's not that Minerva was, I suppose, was she jealous of Medusa in Ovid's reworking of the myth? But there was a beautiful priestess who had this contact with Neptune, and it seems very unfair that Minerva treated her like that. It was Neptune supposedly that raped her, but still it was Minerva that had to suffer it was Medusa that had to suffer the consequences of being transformed into a monster. And I do think that from Ovid's reworking of the myth, we might get a sense of jealousy. And from what I've seen, I think there is some possibility that Caput Algol is about jealousy, or can be about jealousy. So when I talk about Algol as a fixed star, I'm not saying, by the way, that I am an expert on fixed stars. I wouldn't have said that fixed stars play an important role in my astrology. There are people who have entire astrological systems based on fixed stars. So they will look at loads of fixed stars. They will look at the whole chart, and they will assign fixed stars to each planet, and they will come up with an entire interpretation based on it. So perhaps I'm really saying I am a bit of a jack of all trades when it comes to astrology. I know a bit about lots of different things, but I don't want to claim that I have some in-depth expertise about fixed stars. I'm not claiming that. I'm sure there are people who know far more about fixed stars than me, and in fact probably people listening to you, some of you probably know more about fixed stars, even know more about Algol than me. So I'm just trying my best, and I'm going to now look at a few horoscopes that have Algol on them, or have Algol involved. And so maybe it will work, maybe it won't work. So let's start off with someone I don't really understand, but who does have Sun on Algol. Sorry, not Sun on Algol. Has Mars on Algol. Tom Cruise. I don't know anything about Tom Cruise, but here is his chart, and you can see that he has got Mars on Algol. 26/6 Taurus at noon. I don't have his time of birth. I suppose that Mars might be about people being jealous of him. It may be something to do with his private life. It may be him living out that Mars conjunct Algol through his films. So there is his Mars square Uranus. So you tell me, how does that Mars-Uranus square with Mars conjunct Algol work in Tom Cruise's life? I don't really know. I have no interest in Tom Cruise, but I thought I'd bring him up anyway, just to point out the fact that he has Mars on Algol. Then we have two people who've got Mars on Algol, who are both dead, both killed by the Americans, and one of those people was killed by Trump, and that is Qasem Soleimani. So he was head, I think, of the Republican Guards in Iran. Very powerful figure, was supposedly responsible for a lot of terrorist attacks. I suppose when the Americans were in Iraq, a lot of them being killed by improvised explosive devices. I believe some of them were provided by the Iranians, so you might see that Qasem Soleimani was responsible for that. Though, we shouldn't forget that Qasem Soleimani played a big role in defeating ISIS. I know we think about it being the Americans defeating ISIS. In fact, it was, to a great extent, it was the Iranians that helped defeat ISIS. Anyway, he was killed outside Baghdad airport by I think, a drone, and Trump ordered it. And yeah, there's his Mars conjunct Algol. I don't know whether he was decapitated in that attack. I suppose that's possible. I don't know what shape his body was in. And he has Mars conjunct the South Node. Of course, being a Muslim, he wouldn't believe in karma, but maybe it was something from the past, him getting overly involved with violence, perhaps. Perhaps that's just a manifestation of Mars conjunct the South Node. And Mars is also, you can see Mars square Pluto. And I think he probably lived out the Algol archetype. Now, someone born the day before Qasem Soleimani, on March the 10th, 1957, was Osama bin Laden. So, like Qasem Soleimani, Osama bin Laden had Mars in Taurus conjunct Algol square Pluto. And I think by looking at Qasem Soleimani and Osama bin Laden, we get a strong picture about how Mars conjunct Algol could work. Another person who had something connected with Algol was Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition leader who was victim of a nerve gas attack. He went to the West to get treatment. He came back to Russia, got arrested, sent to prison, died in prison. And he has Mercury conjunct Algol. So you could say Mercury conjunct Algol might be the nerve gas attack. I mean, Mercury is about the nervous system, and that is what happened to him. He wasn't killed by the nerve gas attack, but his health was seriously damaged by it. But Mercury is also the communication planet, and he is, or was, a great communicator. I remember that video where he had a video outside Putin's mansion, really trying to humiliate and get Putin through this video. And I think that really did for him, that video. And he just couldn't help himself. He perhaps talked too much. And in the case of Alexei Navalny, his words may have been responsible for his downfall. So you have to be careful what you say, perhaps, with Mercury conjunct Algol. Then we have Brigitte Macron. I think Brigitte Macron is a bit of an Algol figure in a way. If you go back to the Algol archetype. So Brigitte Macron has Jupiter conjunct the midheaven, and she's got an Algol on the midheaven. Jupiter's a bit off the midheaven, but that Jupiter conjunct the midheaven may say something about her professional life. So she was a drama teacher, and she had an affair with one of her students. At least one of her students was incredibly attracted to her. And when we think about that attraction, we may be thinking about, we can think about geese. How isn't it with birds with geese and other birds like that, they see someone like the mother and they fixate on it, and that's it. The first thing they see when they come out of the egg is they see the mother, and they're focused on the mother. And it's perhaps a bit like that with Macron. As Macron as a teenager, he's just developing, and he sees his drama teacher, and he fixates, like a bird fixating on its mother, and he cannot get out of that fixation. Now, if she was a responsible teacher, she would perhaps understand the psychological dynamics of it. But no, she's got Jupiter on the midheaven, Jupiter conjunct the midheaven, conjunct Algol. And that suggests a definite immorality to it. And I think we can push the Algol story a bit further. So C.S. Lewis, he wrote a short story. He supposedly wrote a short story. There's some doubts about whether he wrote it, but I think he wrote it. And it was called Forms of Things Unknown. And the plot of the short story was that there was an astronaut called Jenkin, and he'd just split up with his girlfriend, and he was really upset about it, and he went to the moon. And he was on the moon, and he noticed on the moon these human-like piles of petrified mounds on the moon. And so he went through the moon, and then, of course, reality was there was some Gorgon-like figure on the moon. And the last words of the short story were, his eyes met hers. And I'm kind of thinking a bit like Macron as a teenager. He goes into the drama class, he sees Brigitte, his future wife, Brigitte, his eyes met hers. She is like the Gorgon. And once he'd seen her, he was transfixed, he was petrified, literally petrified. That's what happens when you look at the Gorgon. You get turned to stone. And that was it. And there was no one else. And then he ends up marrying her and still with her. So I do think that Brigitte Macron has a certain Gorgon-like aspect to her. And I think that her behavior as a drama teacher was really very Medusa-like. Turning to someone else, Ben Shapiro. He is sort of right-wing social media star. His YouTube videos are everywhere. And he has got the ascendant conjunct Algol. So when we see the ascendant conjunct Algol, we just need to remember that that means that the degree of Algol is on the ascendant. That doesn't necessarily mean that Algol is on the ascendant. We can't necessarily say that the body of Algol, the body of the star, is on the ascendant, but the degree of Algol is on the ascendant. Maybe people are jealous of him. Maybe maybe Algol conjunct the ascendant is about his method of argument. You see lots of YouTube videos, not just by him, but people saying how to argue like Ben Shapiro. So maybe Algol gives him a certain aggressiveness, and maybe people just don't know how to respond to him. You always see these videos of him, and the other person is left speechless. Sort of, they can't argue back in an effective way. At least that's the image one is supposed to get. And I suppose that would be quite Gorgon-like, how he expresses himself. Maybe he comes over powerfully, perhaps, and the sort of hapless, woke college student at the other end of the argument just can't say anything, or can't say anything effectively. And so maybe we're seeing a bit of Algol there. Then someone who seems to have a nice life is Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson was born May the 16th, 1969, and he has Sun conjunct Algol. Maybe he actually benefits from Sun conjunct Algol. Perhaps getting attracted to Algol-like people, the underside of society, things that other people don't want to talk about. Of course, we still don't know how it's going to work out in the end. Maybe he's taking risks that he doesn't know about yet, having Sun conjunct Algol, opposition Neptune. We're in a very polarized society. I mean, someone might have a pot shot at Tucker Carlson, so I think he always has to be careful with that. But maybe it's fine. Maybe he's having a nice life, and maybe he'll continue to have a nice life. And okay, Sun conjunct Algol. Certain people might be jealous of him, but so what? He doesn't care. Turning to a few events, the first person to die in an electric chair, August the 6th, 1890, 6:38 a.m. was the moment the condemned walked into the room, and Algol was on the midheaven. Okay, it wasn't on the midheaven when he was actually electrocuted, but that moment, that dramatic entrance, when he entered the room, Algol was on the midheaven. And that sort of gives us a flavour, perhaps, of what Algol is about. Now, there were two events in 1974 when the Sun was conjunct Algol. The first event I have already covered, which was May the 18th, 1974, was Smiling Buddha, the first Indian nuclear test. May the 18th, 1874, 8:05 a.m. And there you can see Sun is conjunct Algol. And the reason that is important is because Mars was conjunct Algol at the time of the very first nuclear test on July the 16th, 1945. So that was May the 18th, 1974. But something happened on May the 17th, 1974. And what happened on May the 17th, 1974 happened in Dublin. On May the 17th, 1974, there were a lot of bombings in Dublin. So we think of Ireland in terms of the IRA or the INLA and the sort of Catholic organisations, Republican organisations bombing the British mainland or, of course, Ireland as well. But we shouldn't forget that there were loyalist groups, people who did not want Northern Ireland to be part of, did not want a united Ireland. And they saw Republic of Ireland as, their enemy. And so loyalist groups coming from the north went to Dublin, and on May the 17th, 1974, they exploded a lot of bombs and a lot of people were killed. And this was the day before Smiling Buddha. So that is a way in which Sun conjunct Algol could be working. And so it's a time when we do have to be careful around May the 17th, 18th of May 1974, but not any year, May the 17th, 18th, when the Sun is on Algol, certainly caution is required. And recently we've had Fico's shooting. That was on May the 15th, 2024. That was just a week or two ago. And there was a Sun-Jupiter conjunction at the time of Fico's shooting. And that Sun-Jupiter conjunction has as its midpoint 26 Taurus. So Jupiter was a bit off Algol, Sun was a bit off Algol, but the Sun-Jupiter midpoint was right on Algol. And so, again, that's another manifestation of Algol. Terrorism, it wasn't a bomb, but it was about a shooting. And finally, a big event took place with Mars on Algol, or certainly Uranus on Algol, was the Indian Mutiny. So the Indian Mutiny started around dawn on May the 10th, 1857. So this was a rebellion against British rule in India. And it was a rebellion against the East India Company's rule. But as a result, you had prolonged violence. There were massive atrocities on either side, on both sides, and Uranus was conjunct Algol, and we see Mars-Uranus conjunction on Algol. And remember, we've got Mars-Uranus conjunction coming up on Algol on July the 15th of this year, and the conjunction between Mars-Uranus on Algol is a much closer conjunction than we have when we had the Indian Mutiny. So those are a few charts with Mars on Algol, or sorry, not just Mars on Algol, planets on Algol, points on Algol. We've looked at the midheaven on Algol, Brigitte Macron, for example. We've looked at Mercury on Algol with Navalny, Sun on Algol, Tucker Carlson, and Mars on Algol. Well, people, we've had bin Laden and Soleimani. And so we get a picture, I think, of how Algol might be working. But if you are worried about Algol, perhaps because you've got it in your own chart, I wouldn't be too worried about it. Because if it's a personal chart, you can work it out in your own way. And it's not going to have a bad impact, I don't think. Okay, be careful, sure, depending on the symbolism, if it's being transited. But what you can do if you are worried is embrace the symbolism. So if you have got Mercury on Algol, for example, you could just be interested in, I don't know, crime and murder. You can read books about crime and murder, for example. You can embrace the Algol symbolism. You could get into Greek mythology, study the Medusa myth, to study other myths. That might be other ways. That might be a way of dealing with your Mercury on Algol. If you've got the midheaven on Algol, okay, maybe too late, depending on your age, choose your career, but you could choose an appropriate career. You could be a pathologist. You could be, I don't know, you could be as someone investigating crimes. You could be someone writing about crimes. You could be a crime reporter, something to do with crime and violence. Then you would be embracing the symbolism, but potentially in a way that's not going to cause you any harm. So when the universe looks at you and wants to know what you're doing with your Algol, then you say, "Oh, okay, I see that person. They're writing a paper on the Medusa myth. I'll leave that person alone because they're dealing with Algol in their own way." That's fine. So I really must emphasize, if you do have Algol hitting something in your own chart, don't worry about it too much. Of course, if you go and do an Osama bin Laden and you've got Mars on Algol and you decide to set up a terrorist organization, then you're asking for it. But most people with Mars on Algol, they don't do that. I mean, Tom Cruise, he's got Mars on Algol. He seems to be fine. So that's it. Those are a few thoughts about Algol. I hope you found that of some interest. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you enjoyed the video and you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.